Let's go. Let us know when you hit it.
Live.
Okay. Good evening. Welcome to our Windsor County Forum. We're here with the candidates for Windsor County Senate. My name is Susan Waterman, and I will be timekeeping this evening. And I wanted to welcome Allison Clarkson, Becca White, Chris Morrow, and Richard McCormick, who are going to be speaking with us tonight. Tonight, moderating will be Al Alessi. And I would remind everyone that if you appreciate tonight's forum, that you take a few moments out of your very busy evening to click the link underneath of the description of the video to make a donation to the Windsor County Democrats so that we can continue to support candidates in Windsor County and the state that hold our democratic values high. So without further ado, I want to hand things over to Al.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thanks for all your effort to put on this series. This is what, our fourth Meet the Candidates night, and we've got some others that are on the way, and it's been really quite a lot of fun, and the follow-up and the numbers of people that have watched has been phenomenal, so which is great to hear. We have 4 candidates tonight that we're going to be asking questions, the same questions. And for probably the first time in my experience, we have an A in Allison, we have a B with Becca, a C with Chris, and a D with Dick. So we're going to go the first time through with an A, B, C, D, but then it's going to change dramatically from that point on. But the first one we have to go, and that's just going to be for those that I mean, I think for some of you, most people in Windsor County know about you, but let's assume not. Give a background, your story, when you first ran for office in terms of Windsor County, and let people know a bit about you. And Chris, you not having been one of the office holders, we would very much like to hear your story as well. But let's start with Allison. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Windsor County Democrats, for inviting us to share who we are and what we stand for. I'm Allison Clarkson, and I live in Woodstock, Vermont. I'm married to Oliver Goodenough, and we have 2 sons, Ward and William. I'm also the majority leader in the Vermont State Senate. And for 6 years, I've had the honor of representing the people of Windsor County District. Before serving in the Senate, I represented Plymouth, Reading, and Woodstock in the House of Representatives for 12 years. I bring experience and strong values to this race and a record of effective leadership and votes supporting issues Democrats hold dear. We've had an extraordinarily productive biennium devoted to, in large measure, COVID response and relief, helping Vermonters weather the biggest challenge we've faced in a century. I am so proud of how we rose to the occasion and of what we've accomplished. We've appropriated historic investments in housing, workforce, clean water, climate change mitigation, childcare, expansion of broadband and economic development. We constructively redistricted, passed 2 constitutional amendments on to the voters, a major pension reform, and additional gun safety measures. I was raised to value community service, compassion for others, a commitment to social and racial justice, a love of the natural world, a belief in fairness and equity, and in the American dream. Informed by these values, I believe that at its best, government, especially state government, expresses our care and concern for each other. Government undertakes projects that need to be common endeavors, things we can't do alone. Feeding the hungry, educating our young, housing the less fortunate, building roads and bridges, raising our standard of living, and investing in innovation, all things that enable our common good. I'm running for re-election because I love my work as a legislator, solving problems for constituents and all Vermonters. I'd appreciate your vote for another term as your state senator. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. We're going to go to Becca White, Representative Becca White, who is currently state rep from Hartford. And Becca, you're on.
Great. Thank you so much, Al. And thank you to all the Windsor County Democrats. I can't see any of you, but I bet there are a lot of familiar faces out there. I want to start by saying that I believe that every single person deserves the right to thrive in their communities. And that's really the foundation for why I've endeavored into public service. I'm 27 years old. I grew up in the village of Wilder, which is within the town of Hartford. And I now live in White River Junction with my husband, Dylan. We are affordable home owners. And we have one cat named Miss Kitty, who is watching me as I do this, as I converse with you. What you should know about me as you're considering who to vote for in the primary is that I have experience with local government. I served starting at age 20 on the Hartford Select Board, and I was a part of that for 4 years. Lots of things that we were able to accomplish during that time. And some of those experiences that I have include town manager selection, working through a budget, and working on energy and resiliency projects on the local level. Once I had served 2 terms on the select board, there was an open seat for the state rep position here in town. And I was excited to have the opportunity to run for that seat. And I've held that office for the last 2 terms. So it's a big dream of mine to be able to run for office. If you know me, you probably know a little bit about my background. And that's when I should note that it's important for me to tell you that my family growing up, we were a no frills household. We were very privileged in the way that we had access to social safety net programs like Dr. Dinosaur, the free lunch program and breakfast program for the schools, as well as a myriad of other services. So for me, when I think about public service, it's not only supporting my community, but giving back on a really personal level because of the help and support that I got from this community growing up. I'm a graduate from the University of Vermont, and I have a degree in history, and I've worked professionally for a solar company called SunCommon, and I've also worked for Efficiency Vermont. My core values and why you should vote for me include working on economic justice, responding to the climate crisis, so that's my E for environment, and last, equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. Our next candidate up is Chris Morrow. And Chris, you've not, unlike the other 3, you've not been in office. So your answer to this is going to come from a little, a kind of a different perspective. And we're all looking forward to hear about your past and in part what leads you to run at this point for this office.
Right. Well, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Morrow. I have lived in Weston for over 20 years in the house my wife grew up in and where we have raised 2 daughters together. I grew up in Manchester as my parents opened and grew the Northshire bookstore. I then went on to Oberlin College, majoring in environmental studies, and went overseas in the Peace Corps as a volunteer in Thailand for 2 years. I subsequently received a Master of Science degree in environmental policy. After working in Nepal a little bit, I returned home and took over the Northshire bookstore. During my 23 years at the helm of the bookstore, it expanded twice and added a second location, won state and national awards for excellence, including the Governor's Award for Environmental Excellence, and focused on the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. During these years, I worked hard as a founding president of Local First Vermont, an organization devoted to strengthening our communities by keeping money circulating in our local economy. I also attended the Vermont Leadership Institute, put on by the Snelling Center for Government, which is designed to provide Vermont leaders with a broad perspective on the state, its government, and how to make an impact. I have served on 2 school boards, multiple book industry boards, the board of the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, and the board of Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. And I am currently vice president of the board of the Book Industry Charitable Foundation. I am currently beginning a position with a nonprofit in Washington called Adaptation Leader, which will focus on bringing climate change adaptation best practices to communities and organizations across the country. In other words, I've been privileged to live a very dynamic, varied, and challenging life to date. And I want to put all that life experience to work for you in Montpelier. I'm full of energy and I'm ready to get to work. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And finally, Senator Dick McCormick, your introduction to our listeners tonight. Oh, you're muted still, Dick. Sorry. There you
Hi,
go.
I'm Dick McCormick. Since my grandfather died, no one but dental hygienists call me Richard. And although I am on the ballot that way, I live in Bethel with my wife, Cindy. Between us, we have 5 grown children and 6 grandchildren. My grandfather was born and raised here in Bethel. I was not, but we spent part of every summer here. As a kid, I cried every time we went home. And I've lived here now for over half a century. In my non-political life, I made my living with my guitar for many years, starting in Greenwich Village in the 60s. And as you might imagine, that meant I had to supplement my income. And I was a substitute teacher, and I've pounded nails and done deconstruction as well as construction. Did some freelance writing, in part because I wanted to go into politics. I wanted to show the world how smart I was. And people complained that they couldn't understand my columns because I write like a pretentious ass. So I stopped that. In any case, I have been in the Senate. I was sworn into the Senate February of 1989. In the intervening years, I was majority leader for 4 years, during which time we passed civil unions and Act 60. Act 60 did not lower property taxes, but it spread the pain more fairly. I've chaired the Natural Resources and Energy Committee and the Education Committee. I also chaired the Special Committee on Passenger Rail when Amtrak discontinued the Montrealer, and our report was then became law. Every time the train passes, I say that's my train. Is my time really up? My timer just went off.
It is now.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a
By
great guy.
asking that
Rosemary.
question, you went over time.
Okay.
Well, but keep that thought. We'll get back to
Yes.
it, and you'll all have a chance to build on these comments, of course, as we proceed. We got one. I don't have a name as to which of our Windsor County Dems proposed this question, but this is going to be challenging to think about and to be concise. This person listed 7 items, and out of these 7, what are your top 3 in any order? And top 3, I assume, would be in terms of your where you'd focus in terms of importance. And again, this is going to make it sort of complicated. So before I even say who's going to answer first, think about it. It's childcare, climate change, healthcare, higher education, housing, public transportation, and reproductive rights. That's quite a list of 7, and I know they're all things that you've all been involved in one way or the other, but to prioritize those is certainly a challenge. So
Can you repeat those, please?
sure, I'd be happy to. Childcare, climate change, healthcare, higher education, housing, public transportation, and reproductive rights. Okay, you've all got them down? Chris, it happened to be you next, actually, of using my magic letter mixer. So you're up.
Okay. Well, of those 7, which is quite a good list, I would take childcare, climate change, and housing. Really, the housing crisis, which thanks to some of the people on this call, got somewhat addressed in the last session, is really, really a major problem. It was a problem when I was running my business in Manchester. Getting employees, they had to live far away and drive in, and it's only gotten worse It affects all levels of our state, from the homeless to workforce housing. It's really just at all levels of the state, and it needs to be addressed and addressed quickly. And I'm looking forward to the investments from the federal dollars to being put into place in the next few years. But after that federal money goes away, we are still going to need to deal with this issue because it's a long-term fix, and it's essential to the future of Vermont. Childcare is related to this, obviously, housing. Affordable housing, childcare is essential. All the research points to children getting care early in the years, early in their life, leading to vitality and health through their whole lives. And it's really a sound investment from a public policy point of view. And climate change is just the overarching issue of our time in a lot of ways. And I look forward to hopefully talking more about that, because that's an issue that's dear to my heart and something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. But briefly, we need to work on mitigation, as we tried to in the last session. But also we need to think about adaptation and resilience with regards to climate change, because it's here. It's only going to get worse, even if we were to go to zero emissions tomorrow. And I think we need to spend a lot more time thinking about how we adapt to the changing climate and what that means for Vermont in the coming years.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Our next responder is Allison. I know, and this is really hard because they're all 7. So it's difficult to narrow it down. But if you had to, the 3 that would be the top on your list. You're muted, so unmute first.
I
There you
was
go.
taking Susan. I was really trying to be so good. So you're right. It's impossible to make these choices, but certainly, as my dear friend Dick McCormick would say, the existential challenge of our time is climate change mitigation. And one of the great frustrations of this session was obviously the veto of the clean heat standard. But I would take climate change mitigation, housing, and reproductive rights, just to be a little different. Climate change mitigation is critically important, both adaptation, resiliency, and actually reducing the carbon to our entire economy, to our way of life, to our world, to our planet, for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, if we're lucky enough to have them. Housing is one of the most important economic development issues we have to deal with. We do not have enough housing. We need to build 6,000 units in the Upper Valley almost alone. And several of us were at a housing summit the other morning, which reinforced that. And we have passed this session, in this biennium, over almost $300 million invested in housing, affordable housing, bringing people out of homelessness, and middle mixed housing and middle income housing. And we have worked on that, and supportive housing, which is another whole need, which is an ongoing challenge. And then the third, reproductive liberty. I'm very proud of our work in getting this through. And so I'm a big supporter, actually, of both our constitutional amendments, but this one I'm proudest of.
Thank you so much, Allison. Senator McCormick, you're next. Again, a difficult task, but give us your top 3.
Well, I'm going to sort of escape from that trap of having to choose 3 out of 7, because climate change includes mass transit. The big villain on carbon is transportation. And so I'm going to say that climate change is the overarching existential crisis of our time. It matters. Overarching. That's what overarching means. I think that speaks for itself. The debate on the science ended years ago, and now it is a matter of what are we going to do about it. And most of our carbon footprint is transportation. Uh, Reproductive freedom is certainly the most urgent and pressing. And I had the honor of being on the Health and Welfare Committee when the amendment came up. Obviously, I supported it in principle. I wasn't sure if we should be amending the Constitution, but I was persuaded and very persuaded, and came out swinging on it. And I think, we're beginning to get some pushback now, and I think it shows how important it is that we pursue that. And then was healthcare one of the on the
Yes.
list?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was.
Healthcare. I first ran in 1988, and my position paper on healthcare then said every civilized country but South Africa and the United States has healthcare as a right. And South Africa has since then cleaned up its act.
All right, great. Thank you. And Becca, your top three?
Thanks, Al. I too was struggling to try to rank these, and I went for the things that I've heard knocking at the door. I've been out talking to constituents, and what's so interesting about Windsor County voters is the diversity of lived experiences. But across the board, what I've heard the loudest when I've knocked on doors is affordable housing. When Vermonters are unable to make decisions about when they're being forced to make decisions about medical expenses, where they're going to live and afford to be where they want to live. And then any food, any other choice, energy, all of that is sitting on whether or not they can afford to live where they want to live and where they want to stay. So I would say that's the foundational issue that I've heard about from folks at this point, and the issue that I'll be continuing to work on if I have the privilege of being elected to the Senate. Then I was thinking about the unique qualities that the Senate has compared to the House. As a current state rep, I'm on the Transportation Committee, and Senator McCormick is spot on. 42% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. That's why I requested to be on that committee. That's why I moved the Transportation Modernization Act in my first biennium and the Transportation Innovation Act in my second biennium. So climate change would be number 2 for me. But because we're different from the House, if I were to be in the Senate, we have 2 committee options. So I wanted to think I would prioritize based on what committee of jurisdiction I was on. And I'd like to be on a committee that has a robust ability to respond to climate change. And I'd also like to be on a committee that responds to childcare, because that's the issue that's keeping working women out of the workforce now. 80% of the people who have not returned to our workforce in Vermont are women. That's a problem. Childcare is a foundational issue to why that's happening.
Great. Thank you for that. My next question, and I did this on purpose a little bit, but it had just been on the list anyway, but I thought of, we take one of those 7 and kind of drill in, okay? So the one I picked, because it was already on the list, was the public transportation piece. So what are the key pieces we need to make that change? What's missing? What legislation would we provide, or have we that, or what steps haven't been taken yet? Which have been? How far away are we from having meaningful change? And this actually, Becca, sorry, you're first again, but continue.
Okay, well, this is really my, you've given me the softball question, Al, because serving on transportation, zero fare public transportation was something I fought tooth and nail for in this last biennium. It was something that we debated fiercely to continue. If you're someone who's used public transportation during the pandemic, you will have noticed that it is fare free. You're not paying a fare when you get on the bus or you get in a car, van, pool, whatever your source of public transportation. What I see as the future of public transportation in Vermont is continuing policies like that make them equitable. But we are missing one key thing in Vermont that makes public transportation work, and that's scale. We don't have the amount of people needed except for in really tight hubs like White River Junction with advanced transit, or downtown Windsor or Springfield. So what we need to invest in is creative solutions like microtransit. And microtransit is kind of if you've heard me talk about it, you know it's my favorite subject. And it's like Uber or Lyft. It's a public, free microtransit system that we have employed in Montpelier right now as a pilot program. So it means that you get on your smartphone, and I'll say, Dick McCormick's brother, Kurt McCormick, he can figure it out. So I know anyone can figure this app out. He's not a smartphone guy. You get on it, you say, I want to be picked up here at the State House, and I want to get to my appointment up at the top of the hill at the hospital by 3:30. They'll pick you up. It's safe, it's free, and then you get to where you need to go to meet your appointment. That's the last mile, and that's what I think we need to do around public transportation.
Great. Thank you very much. Chris, you're next on this question about ways, some details on how we would solve the transportation issues and improve our situation in that regards.
Oh, thank you. It is indeed an important issue. I remember when I was living in Thailand, we had, and I was living in a very rural area, we had all kinds of public transportation options, from rail to buses to small rickshaw type devices to get to really anywhere you wanted to go. And it was a huge convenience and also economic driver, because people knew they could get to where they wanted to go from their home into town, do their shopping, go to work. And it was very effective. I think Becca points to the main challenge in Vermont, which is scale. And on the west side of the state, we've tried to get rail going more successfully and have faced scale issues. But there are bus systems that have developed in pockets of Vermont. I think what we really need is a lot more coordination and clarity on the financing and subsidization of the whole system, because it really, without the scale, and if you are going to zero fare, which is a nice thing to have, then it's going to be an expensive prospect. I think with electrification of vehicles, that will help. And this pilot project of microtransit sounds excellent. And I think we could start working electric bicycles into this whole mix, because they're powered, and you can go a lot further with electric bicycles. And it's really something that is important. And personally, I need to do some more research on to before I get in the legislature. Thank you.
Thank you. Dick, you're next on this, and I know it's an area you have also addressed in your earlier comments, but dig into it deeper for us now.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of torture this question into the question I wish you had asked, but it's that mass transit is part of a larger question, which is just alternatives to the individual gas guzzler being used for multiple trips every day with one person in the car. That we need to get off of our wastefulness regarding gasoline and regarding introduction of carbon. So since the question was mass transit, I'll start with that. Build it and they will come. I already claimed credit for the Vermonter train. My brother Kurt was the father of the Ethan Allen train, and the two of us worked together so there would not be an East Side, West Side civil war. But the fact is, I don't always take Amtrak when I travel, because the schedule doesn't work. We've got one southbound Vermonter and one northbound Vermonter, and often my schedule doesn't work. We need more mass transit. That also, I live in Bethel. Up and down Interstate 89, there's a commuter bus route. And sometimes, and I hate to say it, but when fuel prices are up, it's standing room only. And when the prices go down, people get back in their cars. And I'm not saying that we need to torture people with high gas prices, God forbid anyone should talk about a carbon tax. But I think what we do need are incentives to conserve energy and disincentives to waste energy. And my time is up.
No, you still have 30 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, thanks. The infrastructure. I ride a bicycle. I live 1.5 miles from town. I usually drive to town. It's not safe for me to ride my bike. The shoulders are too narrow. That is just yet one example. And when we talk bike paths, we think of as recreational. Well, that's good. They are, but they also ought to be part of how you travel, how you get where you're going. Ireland. I remember seeing guys in overcoats with briefcases getting on their bikes, nuns in their habits getting on their bikes. It's how you get from here to there. And we don't make our roads that way. I think now my 30 seconds is up.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And I definitely can, as a biker myself, I can attest to the lack of shoulders. So thanks for bringing that up. Allison, you are up for this question on transportation and how you'd see it changing.
I think everybody's had very good answers so far. I'm a big believer in micro transit, just like Becca is. If we're talking about public transportation in a rural state, it's a big challenge. And I think we need to be as creative as possible, not only incenting micro transportation, but also carpooling. We need to do much more carpooling. We're building out our we're building out the places we could park by the interstate. What do we call them? I'm totally punting.
Park and rides.
Park and rides. Thank you, Becca. We are building out our park and rides, and to add the bus. If I knew that a bus was going to pick me up at the Bethel Park and Ride, I would not have to drive to Montpelier twice a week. It would be great. I would love to do that. But also, I think we need to connect our younger drivers who need experience with our older drivers who shouldn't maybe be driving quite as much as they are. The younger drivers need that experience. Driver's ed will give them credit. And we could have more older drivers maybe feeling more comfortable and trusting that they would have a way to get to doctor's appointments and to other things. So I think we need to get really creative about the drivers we do have and how we can pair them with the drivers we might like to have fewer of. I think we definitely need to work on alternatives to single drivers. I think we need to be investing much more in bringing back our rail. It is heartbreaking what the 50s did to our rail system. And I think we need to continue to drive housing development into our downtown and village centers so that we can live where we work. And that means we can walk or bike. And having just come from Cambridge, where they have they've invested enormously in bike lanes, bus lanes and bike lanes. And it's very expensive to add that, as Becca knows, anybody who's served on transportation, it's very expensive to add that extra 2 feet onto a road, but we need to be doing it. And we need to be doing it with every new road that we build. But it's a housing solution. It's a creative solution. There are all sorts of great things we can be exploring. We don't need to reinvent the wheel on this. The world is doing it. We just need to finance it and embrace change.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, again, I'm going to feed off these though. We are going to make some directional changes momentarily, but you just brought up, I'm sorry, Chris, am I on the wrong list going across?
Becca was going to add something to Al.
Go ahead, Becca.
Oh, she didn't? Oh.
No, all right.
I did just want to add one piece, which if folks are wondering about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, I think that there were some real opportunities that we were able to take advantage of this legislative session. And it's a good year if you're interested in public transportation to look back at some of the work we did.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And we haven't spent all that money yet.
My next question is, that was the end that you all had a chance to talk about that. The next one ties into it, and even off of what you had just been saying, Allison, because it would also seem that if housing and employment were more centrally located in cities and towns and villages, that it becomes less of the demand that we had seen. So I want to think or ask you each to talk about how you'd envision through legislation and advocacy redeveloping our cities, towns, and villages to meet the coming decades in our state. And Dick, this is you first. And with Bethel being a great example of that. And I know there's been a lot of effort in Bethel to make changes. So, but wherever you look in Vermont, go for it.
Yeah, my fellow Bethelonians are doing a great job. Actually, I don't know if people noticed someone walking by while I was talking last time. It was my wife, Cindy, returning from a meeting of the Bethel Food Shelf. We are active community here. Now, I guess it was the garden, the community garden. The villages and cities are not going to thrive by themselves. Market forces are not friendly to our downtowns. People want, a lot of people have, their ideal is to live out in the country, and a little bit of Connecticut in Vermont. And Vermonters drive more per capita than the people of any other state. And it's because we live spread out. And to try to incent people to live downtown is a real challenge. I voted in favor of a downtown development bill that I really hate. There has things on Act 250 that I don't like at all. But no way was I going to vote against a downtown development bill, because we have to incent development in our downtowns to take the pressure off our countryside, to take the pressure off our forests. The path of least resistance for development is a field. But and I'm out of time.
Is that it, Susan? Was that? Yeah.
No, you had 30 seconds left.
Okay, when the sign comes up,
That
I
means you
actually
have
don't
30
read-
seconds.
I don't read it. I just see that it's there. It's kind of like going back to first grade.
All right. For
Okay.
Dick,
No,
wait
anyway,
until.
let me just say, with Act
go ahead.
250, that there are new pressures, in particular with the improvements in electronic communication and the ability to work at home, the pressures, the development pressures on our countrysides and our forests are greater than they've ever been. And so we don't want to start loosening up on our ability to regulate development.
I would agree wholeheartedly on that. Becca, you're next on answering or developing the areas that you'd like to see change or legislation enacted that has to do with downtown development.
Sure. Well, I'll just start by saying that our two incumbent senators, I think we do have to give a real hearty thank you for the work that they've done on this exact topic. That big shoes to fill on this one. For me, when I look at the work that's been done in my downtown, White River Junction, this last Friday, actually, Senator McCormick and I enjoyed a First Friday. That is the kind of creative economy work that revitalizes our downtowns and draws in people who are my age, and it draws in older Vermonters who want to age in place, who want a walkable downtown. So for me, the legislative actions that I'm supportive of are things like the tax incremental financing districts, TIF districts. It's what downtown White River Junction has been able to use to reinvest in our community with that sidewalk improvement, wastewater and sewer. I mean, all of that is the undergirding to how we improve our designated downtowns. And there's some legislative work that was done, and Representative Charlie Kimball is one of the key people on that. The other piece that I wanted to highlight for this group is how we incorporate mixed use within our downtowns. White River Junction is a real poster child for having affordable housing embedded in housing that's retail rate or like market rate. So when you have a beautiful development from someone like Matt Busey, where it's just a gorgeous property that also has affordable housing in it, that lifts up the entire community. So for me, it's how do we invest in those downtowns? How do we support the creative economy? And how do we support developers making the right decisions in the right places for our downtowns?
Great. Thank you so much. Allison.
Thank you. Well, this is an area that I've, as Vice Chair of Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, this has been our top priority for the last several sessions. And we need to continue to do this work, but we've done a lot to take what's already there and make more of it. So we have a lot in our downtowns and village centers. We have a lot of buildings that we're not taking full advantage of. We have second and third floors that are vacant. We have big houses in our downtowns that we could be creating accessory dwelling units in, ADUs. We have incented that, and we've provided all sorts of navigational help. Every downtown could do with more ADUs. And we have also incented and provided grants for landlords that have let properties go a bit, that are vacant, blighted, or not code compliant. We have grants for people to improve their properties and bring them back online. So it's like, the best energy is the energy we don't use. In this case, we are not using some of the infrastructure we already have. Becca's talked about one of our most important tools, TIFs. If we could have more TIF districts and mini TIF districts, sort of mini TIF kinds of projects. We need water and sewer in our downtowns. Everywhere. That means Norwich. That means, that means a lot of towns that don't have water and sewer yet really need them for us to be able to drive more development, smart growth. We've also invested in modernizing our bylaws, our town and village bylaws. The zoning work we've invested in our towns being able to take advantage of these bylaw modernization grants. Also, priority housing. We enabled a priority housing to have more housing in towns that are fairly small, but we've incented the ability to have a development of 50 units rather than just 25 in our smaller towns. But we need to continue this work. There's lots still to do on it, but there's lots of exciting opportunities now that we've passed.
Great to hear. Thank you. And Chris, your thoughts on city, town, village development directions, paths, solutions?
Yeah, sure. Well, we've covered most of it already. I think local zoning is crucial and dictates a lot of what happens in town. So that's not state level, but the state can support local zoning boards modernizing and expanding their visions for their own towns. Making it walkable and bike friendly. We've talked a little bit about that already, but those are actually very important. Sidewalks. There's some towns that don't have sidewalks, and certainly lots that don't have bike lanes. And I think we need to focus more on supporting our local businesses. People aren't going to walk around town if the services aren't there. So that's partly public policy, but it's also partly just civic policy of encouraging people to support their local independent businesses so they can stay in business and you can walk down the street and get whatever it is you need instead of going online. And to the degree that tax policy or education can help do this, that would go a long way to creating towns that people want to live in, because they won't live there if they can't get their services. And tax policy, as has been discussed can support this to a great degree. And mixed use also, in many locations, having retail on the first floor and living quarters on the second and third and maybe fourth floors is certainly a superior way to design our towns and cities. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I had a question that was sent to me today. Of the many vetoes signed by Governor Scott over the last, well, since he's been governor, they were curious as to which did you find the least objectionable and which perhaps the most frustrating veto that he enjoined. And Chris, I'm going to go with you first. You may not have the institutional memory to, and I understand that, but reinterpret that for your own purposes, something that might apply to that question.
Yeah, well, I am not as up on this as everyone else for sure. I think rejection of the clean heat standard was very unfortunate. I understood his reasoning, not understanding the cost of something that with the implications and impact of the clean heat standard is a legitimate concern. But given where we are with climate change and how late we are to the game and how much thought went into that program and the support behind it, I think that that was very unfortunate. We really need to work on climate change at all levels, and including our heating systems. Fortunately, with ground source and air source heat pumps and incentives around those and their efficiency growing, there is a transition happening towards converting our heat to electricity, but anything we can do to accelerate that would be important and appreciated. And in terms of least objectionable, I'm actually not sure. I know he's vetoed close to 30 or more than 30 bills at this point. But I'm going to leave it at that and let the others take it.
That's all right. And don't feel, any of you don't have to do both of those. That's a kind of a two-pronged question. But Allison, you were next on the list of most objectionable and least of Governor Scott's vetoes. Muted, you're muted though.
I'm trying to be so good. All of his vetoes are objectionable. There isn't one of them that isn't objectionable.
Well,
Partly
most though,
because
yeah, but yeah.
It represents, I have to say this as a legislator, it represents his lack of engagement with the process. And that is incredibly frustrating. I've served under Governor Douglas as well. Governor Douglas worked with us when things began to get objectionable in the process. We were much more productive and able to address the governor's concerns before we got to a veto. Think of the taxpayer waste of time in two committees, spending all that time on a bill that is going to get vetoed. Anyway, it's enraging. And yes, he's done a great job on COVID, but he is enraging on all these other things. The most puzzling veto is the pension bill. We had unanimous votes on these, and we had a unanimous, first historic unanimous override of a governor's veto. Why did he veto that bill? It's a total puzzlement. The most frustrating vetoes for me have been paid family leave, minimum wage, clean heat standard, the rental housing and safety bill. You name it. I work on a ton of things he vetoes. Almost everything I do, he vetoes. So, and it's not it's we do all these things together. And it's just, vetoes represent the dashing of the hopes of 180 legislators who've worked together on something to get it across the finish line. And people should be frustrated because this is a huge waste of our time and money.
That's a great insight. Thank you for sharing that. Becca, you're next on that.
Thanks, Al. Yeah, I fully agree with what we just heard from Senator Clarkson. Of the 29 vetoes that Phil Scott has done in his tenure as governor, that's more than any previous governor. From my understanding, it's 10 more than the closest person to have a veto record high enough to be counted. For me, the clean heat standard was devastating. To be frank, when we lost the override, I had to go out of the state house and cry because it represents to me an injustice against future generations. And I really appreciated the vote explanation we got from Representative Sarah Copeland-Hanzis, where she actually reflected that exact point. If I had to pick one that maybe wasn't the one that I was, going outside and having to process, that would be hard. I still want to learn more about ranked choice voting, and I know we just let that become law. There are some charter changes that I believe he vetoed that I guess that's the one if I had to pick. Some of the other things that he vetoed that I do think as Democrats, we really need to hold his feet to the fire on, although he came back on it, but gun violence prevention. He's been able to play the game against the legislature to exactly how he wants gun legislation to be written. And we're at a point where we are at a crisis moment. And to be able to have a governor who can just veto as important legislation as that, where we need to get 100 people in the House to override it, that's just unfair, and it stacks the game against the most vulnerable Vermonters. So on any issue, whether it be gun violence prevention, affordable housing, and the rental registry work that we did, all of that, to exactly Senator Clarkson's point, you're just getting dashed hopes, and it doesn't set up a fair fight when we're an unstaffed legislative body, unlike the governor's office.
Great. That is more great insight. And Senator McCormick, you're last on this question. How would you add to that?
Okay, well, I'll start with the veto that I thought was defensible. It was a bill that I voted for and then decided to uphold the veto. And that was a charter change for the city of Brattleboro, town of Brattleboro, that would allow 16-year-olds to vote. I voted for that. And then your classic angry guys would come up to me and say, you just voted to not treat 21-year-old criminals as criminals because they're not fully developed yet. How could you then vote for 16-year-olds to vote? And I found myself unable to pass the straight face test. I found it very difficult to explain to them how I could reconcile those two votes. And I had one of those moments where, you sleep better. I said, I think I was wrong. I think I made a mistake. I think the governor's right about this. So I supported him on that. But otherwise, the pattern of vetoes has already been said, is outrageous. And I was Phil Scott's first committee chair, and he and I worked well together, and I've always spoken well of him as his conciliatory bipartisan approach. And he has betrayed himself, in my view. This is not the Phil Scott I knew and liked. And there's a level of imperiousness and hostility, and also, frankly, peel off the nice guy stuff. You got a Republican. You got a guy who's saying, this is all well and good, but next quarter's bottom line won't be quite as good if we have this reasonable legislation. That's the idea that we're Democrats. We take next quarter's bottom line seriously. We know the business of America is to do business, but the next quarter's bottom line is not the definitive sole measure of all things. And I'm afraid that my friend Phil Scott thinks that it is. And so what you see is this real indifference to issues that matter a lot, not just to the 180 legislators, to the 630,000 people we represent as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that. This may be our last question. It may push us slightly over the 8 o'clock line. If that's, can we just get through this one question? Okay. And this is something that Senator Clarkson and I had a chance to ask you in passing. I don't even remember where, but it had to do with public tax dollars going to private schools and potentially private religious schools. And it was we had a short moment to chat. And I was wondering, and I've heard it from other folks on social media and elsewhere, and it seems like this might be a good opportunity to get some clarity on that as to what our options are. It certainly brings up folks' emotions pretty quickly. So could you start us with that, Senator Clarkson, please?
Oh, it's well, we're, just to frame it up for people, we're one of only 2 states in the entire United States that allow public tax dollars to go to private institutions. We're now in a battle with the Supreme Court, and we are in some ways waiting for the Supreme Court. Okay, so the 2 states are Maine and Vermont. And this system developed because our rural towns, not every town was willing to or was able to afford a high school, a middle or high school. So what developed over the last 100 years is this system of taking our public tax dollars and paying for public education, but also enabling it to go to private institutions. So it's an anathema in 48 other states. So the Supreme Court decision several years ago is really challenging this and saying not only is it going to be allowed to go to private private independent schools, but you must also use it for parochial schools and for dual enrollment. Maine is challenging that, and in large measure, we're waiting for the Maine decision coming from the Supreme Court about how it's going to be dealt with. But I know we will have a battle royal if the Supreme Court decision comes down and says public money will be able to go to parochial schools and to religious institutions. And that will call I think that will call the question on public dollars going to private independent schools. It is already a challenging subject for many legislators.
Yes.
I, as you know, have been very invested in limiting tax dollars going out of state. I mean, at least public tax dollars can be used in state for teachers, and it's an economic development thing in state. You cannot even justify it going out of state.
Yeah.
So that still hasn't been fully worked on. But I think this is going to be a huge challenge to us going forward, depending on what the Supreme Court decides about the Maine case. And we're really, the reason we took no action this year is people really wanted to wait and see what was going to happen with the Supreme Court case in Maine. And
All right, good. And just for the listeners, the sort of the private schools, quote, are things like Thetford Academy and Sharon Academy, and come to mind in Windsor County that are, right? Is that what you mean by, I mean, those are schools that are getting
the Waldorf school
in Waldorf. Okay.
I mean, there are quite a few of them. There are quite a few of them. There are the 4 traditional academies, which my guesses would be in play to come up with a special status. But this will be a big challenge for us. All right. And anyway.
All right. Thank you. Senator McCormick.
I got myself into a lot of trouble when I was chair of education because I put forward a bill to require that any private school that received public money would have to play by the same rules as public schools. And the pushback on that was pretty intense. I think in the ensuing years, a lot of people have come around to that thinking, to my thinking, that these are tax dollars, and they're it's the people's money, And we, the people's legislature, make laws pertaining to the public schools. Well, this is public money, and so it shouldn't be used for other uses other than properly legislated public uses. In particular, I have a problem with religious schools, and I do not have a problem with religion or with religious education. But we are a nation of people of many different beliefs and many different religious affiliations. And some people don't necessarily want their tax dollars used to proselytize for other religions. And I think that actually my colleague, Allison, has spoken well on the issue. This is not the first time after Allison has spoken, and it's my turn, that I've said what she said.
What she said.
So I would just say what she said.
Thank you very much. Chris Morrow, you're interesting that you lived in another country where Christianity was a relatively small component of that anyway. But anyway, this isn't just about religious schools, just broadly in terms of the concept public tax dollars and private schools, whether religious or otherwise. Your thoughts and insights on that?
Yeah, well, I'm a proponent for school choice because I've lived it and my kids have lived it. My youngest daughter just graduated from Burton Academy in Manchester. There is no public high school, and so if there was no choice, then I don't know what she would have done. The fact, just because it's quote unquote private doesn't mean that they're not supporting the local economy and state economy for that matter. You have people coming in from all over the world to attend our academies and generating tremendous amount of tax revenue for the state and for, in this case, Manchester. Way more than I think is spent. But it's really a question of choice it's our local tax dollars, and where are we going to spend them? And certainly if we don't have an alternative, then we need to be able to send our kids to a good school. It actually works to our benefit, because the private side, because they can raise so much money privately and just increase the value of the education that all students, you don't have to apply to get in. All students benefit from that. I do start having issues once we get into the realm of religious schools because of the separation of church and state. And that makes me more nervous. But overall, the concept of school choice does not bother me, because I've seen how it benefits the kids down in Manchester and and in Weston. We send our kids from Weston to Burton Academy, and it works quite well.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And ending our questions and answers tonight, Representative White, you're up.
Thanks. I'll just start by saying I'm a proud Hartford High and public school system graduate. I did my entire tenure, both through high school and college, at public universities as well, with UVM. For me, where I think you'll see a difference between Chris and I, for example, as the two new folks, is I think that whenever we have a drain against our public schools, we're directly harming the most vulnerable children in our communities. So in any instance that we could be supporting public schools over private academies, that's where I stand. What concerns me on top of that is when we have private institutions that for low-income students offer financial aid and then are getting the cream on top, which is those vouchers. So I don't support that type of use for public dollars. What I do support is when there are learning challenges or special circumstances where children need a different option than what's available for them in public school, or like in the case where there is not an available high school. Those situations are different to me than what we're experiencing with some of the wealthier elite institutions that have typically denied the most challenging critical cases for students who need education support. What ends up happening is the public school then takes those students on, and the cost to educate them is higher. So we're continuing to ask our public schools and our public administrators to do the heavy lift within our community while not giving them equal funding when we compare it to private institutions. The last thing I want to note is we have queer youth in our communities, and it is not fair to me that they do not have the same options for education if there's a religious school that is telling them they're not accepted. I'm not aware of that situation in Windsor County, but if I were to become aware of that situation, that would really light a fire, because protecting queer youth and trans youth is extremely important to me.
Thank you so much. And it's certainly going to have a lot of controversy, depending on, as Senator Clarkson mentioned, the Supreme Court case and other changes as they come up. But thank you all so much. And I'm going to hand this back over to Susan to close it out and make our Act Blue link at the bottom of the page for all our listeners. Go for it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Al, and thank you very much for Becca and Chris and Dick and Allison. I appreciate you all so much for coming in tonight. It's a hard call to be a public servant, and I appreciate all of you so much for doing that. But yes, as Al said, I want to remind everyone that joined us tonight that the link is down below and underneath the description. And please do make a donation to the Windsor County Democrats so that you can ensure that Democrats up and down the ballot are going to be elected in November. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you all. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
That is an end stream.
did you click end stream?